to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews.
2 Kings chapter 6 starts with an odd little miracle, but then gets into some warfare. We begin. Now the sons of the prophets said to Elisha, "See, the place where we dwell under your charge is too small for us. Let us go to the Jordan, and each of us get there a log, and let us make a place for us to dwell there." And he answered, "Go." Then one of them said, "Be pleased to go with your servants." And he answered, "I will go." So he went with them, and when they came to the Jordan, they cut down trees. But as one was felling a log, his axe head fell into the water, and he cried out, "Alas, my master! It was borrowed." Then the man of God said, "Where did it fall?" When he showed him the place, he cut off a stick and threw it in there, and made the iron float. And he said, "Take it up." So he reached out his hand and took it. Once, when the king of Syria was warring against Israel, he took counsel with his servants, saying, "At such and such a place shall be my camp." But the man of God sent word to the king of Israel, "Beware that you do not pass this place, for the Syrians are going down there." And the king of Israel sent to the place about which the man of God told him. Thus he used to warn him, so that he saved himself there more than once or twice. And the mind of the king of Syria was greatly troubled because of this thing, and he called his servants and said to them, "Will you not show me who of us is for the king of Israel?" And one of his servants said, "None, my lord, O king. But Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom." And he said, "Go and see where he is, that I may send and seize him." It was told him, "Behold, he is in Dothan." So he sent there horses and chariots and a great army, and they came by night and surrounded the city. When the servant of the man of God rose early in the morning and went out, behold, an army with horses and chariots was all around the city. And the servant said, "Alas, my master, what shall we do?" He said, "Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." Then Elisha prayed and said, "O Yahweh, please open his eyes that he may see." So Yahweh opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. And when the Syrians came down against him, Elisha prayed to Yahweh and said, "Please strike this people with blindness." So he struck them with blindness in accordance with the prayer of Elisha. And Elisha said to them, "This is not the way, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom you seek." And he led them to Samaria. As soon as they entered Samaria, Elisha said, "O Yahweh, open the eyes of these men, that they may see." So Yahweh opened their eyes, and they saw, and behold, they were in the midst of Samaria. As soon as the king of Israel saw them, he said to Elisha, "My father, shall I strike them down? Shall I strike them down?" He answered, "You shall not strike them down. Would you strike down those whom you have taken captive with your sword and with your bow? Set bread and water before them, that they may eat and drink and go to their master." So he prepared for them a great feast. And when they had eaten and drunk, he sent them away, and they went to their master. And the Syrians did not come again on raids into the land of Israel. Afterward, Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, mustered his entire army and went up and besieged Samaria. And there was a great famine in Samaria as they besieged it, until a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver, and the fourth part of a cab of dove's dung for 5 shekels of silver. Now as the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried out to him, saying, "Help, my lord, O king." And he said, "If Yahweh will not help you, how shall I help you? From the threshing floor, or from the winepress?" And the king asked her, "What is your trouble?" She answered, "This woman said to me, 'Give your son that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow.' So we boiled my son and ate him, and on the next day I said to her, 'Give your son that we may eat him.' But she had hidden her son." When the king heard the words of the woman, he tore his clothes. Now he was passing by on the wall, and the people looked, and behold, he had sackcloth beneath on his body. And he said, "May God do so to me, and more also, if the head of Elisha the son of Shaphat remains on his shoulders today." Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. Now the king had dispatched a man from his presence. But before the messenger arrived, Elisha said to the elders, "Do you see how this murderer has sent to take off my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door, and hold the door fast against him. Is not the sound of his master's feet behind him?" And while he was still speaking with them, the messenger came down to him and said, "This trouble is from Yahweh. Why should I wait for Yahweh any longer?" This is the word of the Lord. Really, what we see in this chapter is the fickleness of man. We'll get there. So we start with that minor miracle, the strange miracle. So the sons of the prophets have been studying with Elisha. They have been living with Elisha, and they are complaining that they need more space, that they are too crammed in that spot, and so they want to go and build a new place to dwell by the Jordan. Whether that's all of them still dwelling together or not, I don't really see clearly from the text here. It could be that they would all move to this new location by the Jordan. It could be a separation of the sons of the prophets into two different camps. But regardless, that's what they do. Elisha gives them permission. He goes with them. They're cutting down trees, and one of the men's axes, the head pops off and lands in the Jordan River. And he immediately cries out to Elisha because he has borrowed that axe head from another. Which means he's going to have to pay whoever that was back for the loss that he has incurred. Elisha has compassion upon him. It's not a major loss, right? It's a piece of iron. It can be repaid. But in order to protect the man's reputation from a minor hit and to protect his pocketbook, I don't know if they had pocketbooks back then, protect his money bag, he performs that miracle. He takes a stick, casts it into the river, and just as a stick will float onto the top of the river, the axe head floats right up to the top too. I really don't have a lot to say about this one. It's a miracle, and Elisha did it. The Lord granted it, and we can be thankful for the miracles of the Lord, even if we don't understand necessarily their purposes for work in his kingdom. Then we take a major shift in theme, right? As you go into the next paragraph, we're reminded of a war of the king of Syria against Israel. So Syria being a northern enemy to Israel, northeastern, they kept making camp against Israel, seeking to attack and besiege and destroy and hoping to trap the king. But every time Elisha would hear of their plans from Yahweh, and he would send warning to the king of Israel. Which is an interesting thing, right? If you reflect back to 2 Kings chapter 3, to Elisha's words to the Israelite king Jehoram, that he would have nothing to do with him if it weren't for the fact that he was also at that time with Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah. And yet here we see Elisha, the prophet, sparing the life of the king of Israel numerous times. This one's a little easier, I think, to make your educated guess at. Why would he spare his life? Well, he's trying to show him that Yahweh is a gracious king. Even though the king of Israel has been faithless, that God is still being faithful. God is still caring for him, even though he does not. So saved his life more than once, more than twice. The king of Syria is troubled by this. He doesn't understand why the king of Israel always knows where he's moving. And so he assumes, and why wouldn't he, right? He assumes there must be a mole, a spy in his camp, his group. That somebody within that inner circle who knows these details has been ratting out their plans. So the king of Israel has been discovering it. A traitor. But one of the servants quickly speaks up and says, "None, my lord, O king, but Elisha." Look at that. One of the servants knows that Elisha is the prophet of Yahweh in Israel, and that he is the one who can hear the things spoken in secret and share them with the king of Israel. That's something, isn't it? And so what does the king of Syria do? He sends to seize Elisha. If he can get Elisha out of the way, then he can get the king of Israel too. It's hard to know the chronology here. The chronology of 2 Kings, at least at this point, reflecting these accounts with the prophet Elisha as our focus. We're not seeing specifically time being mentioned. Even the names of the kings have been dropped out of this section, right? Until we get to the end of the chapter, at least. So is this the same king who was the master of Naaman from yesterday? It doesn't seem too likely, does it, right? Naaman. Naaman would have protected Elisha. Unless Naaman is the servant who spoke it and acknowledged that it's Elisha. Otherwise, maybe Naaman is the one who has shared Elisha's story with the servants so that they know. And Naaman then, if this was him, has the trust that Elisha will be able to care for himself. Or that Yahweh will care for him might be the best way to say that. And so it is offered up that Elisha is in Dothan, the city there, and so Syria mounts against it. They take their horses, their chariots, they form a great army, and they surround the city. Here's where you could pause and ask your children, what do you think will happen? What do you think's going to happen next? Be interesting to see what your children think and how they see the trust of the Lord at work in the Old Testament. In terms of human thoughts, Elisha wouldn't have a chance. Syria's army camped against a minor city. Dothan's not defensible. This would be a bloodbath, or we're going to destroy your city unless you give us this man, in which case he'd be handed over in an instant. That's earthly wisdom. But that's not what's going to occur. So one of the servants of Elisha gets up early in the morning, sees the army, panics, says, "Alas, my master, what shall we do?" It's earthly fear for what we just described. But Elisha says, "Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." Huh? What? What are you talking about, master? The servant would have been clueless at what Elisha meant by that at that point. But Elisha prays, "O Yahweh, open his eyes that he may see." And the man sees not the might of men, but the might of God. Horses and chariots of fire all around them in the mountains. God's army is there. He is Yahweh of hosts. He is Yahweh of armies, the better way to translate that phrase. And he will provide. He will protect his people. He is going to care for Elisha this day. And really, as you think about this, there's some parallels here. When Elijah is taken up into heaven, it was a chariot of fire that had come and separated him from Elisha. Back in Genesis chapter 3, when Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden, God places a flaming sword at the entrance to the garden to block it. This seems to hint at the idea that angels are involved here, right? At the garden, for example, we know there was an angel there. The text just interestingly does not read as though the angel wields the sword, but the sword almost wields itself. Here, there's no mention of angels. There was no mention of angels in chapter 2 when Elijah was taken up into heaven either. The horses and the chariots, empty? Chariots are manned, right? They have somebody in them who directs the horse. So we would assume that angels are involved in this event. And that gives a very incredible picture to what Jesus says to Peter in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he says that he tells Peter to put his sword away, that he could summon down legions of angels to defend him if he wished. What a picture that would have been to see. Instead, Elisha prays that the people is struck blind, and they are, And so he leads them. This is not the way, this is not the city. Follow me, I will bring you to the man whom you seek. Ultimately, it's true. It's not Elisha that they really want. It's the king of Israel that they're at war with. And so Elisha takes them to the king of Israel. He leads them right into Samaria, prays that just as God opened the eyes of his servant, he would now open the eyes of these that he struck blind, so that they may see again. So he does. So Elisha blinds these men by the Lord and heals them by the Lord. And then they find themselves right there in Samaria, the capital of Israel, where the Israelite army would be. And the king sees them and actually asks permission from Elisha if he can strike them down. Elisha has brought him this gift, his enemy, right there at his footstep, his doorstep, and he asks, and Elisha says no. You shall not strike them down. Essentially, they're prisoners of war. You are to care for them. And so he makes a great feast. He sets bread and water before them, a feast before them. They eat, they drink, they go their way. 23 and 24 don't seem to fit together. The Syrians did not come again on raids into the land of Israel. Afterward, Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, mustered his entire army and went up and besieged Samaria. We learned in chapter 5 with Naaman that he had done raiding in Israel to capture that little girl who would be a servant to his wife, for example. So my take on this is that verse 23 is a reference to those minor skirmishes that the Syrians would just send troops on occasion, strike Israel, take some stuff, and leave. Whereas 24 is a reference to full-fledged war, as Ben-Hadad takes his entire army against the Israelite capital, seeking to destroy Israel entirely. So there's a difference in the two things that are referenced there. Now, as Ben-Hadad does this, there's a great famine in the land. You get some pricing, right? A shekel of silver is worth, by today's dollars, it's roughly 2/5 of an ounce, so it's worth about $11. So 80 shekels of silver for the head of a donkey. That's like $880 for a donkey's head. There's not much there that you can actually eat. You know, the head of an animal isn't where you're going to find the good stuff to eat. That's how bad a spot we're in here in this famine, in this siege. And it gets worse, right? The fourth part of a cab of a dove's dung. That is the equivalent of a cup of bird poop. Sells for 5 shekels. That's $55. Can you imagine paying $55 for a cup of bird poop? That's the state of the dilemma that they're in. And a woman sees the king as he passes by, calls out to him for help. He responds almost sarcastically, right? If Yahweh will not help you, how shall I help you? From the threshing floor, which refers to bread, or from the winepress, which refers to wine. Shall I give you food to eat or something to drink? He blames God for this. But then he does take a step back and he actually asks the woman, what is the matter? What's her trouble? And her story is so wickedly sad. She and another have agreed to eat their sons. Hers first, then the others. She's been tricked, she's been duped, she's been deceived. They ate the one child, but the next day the other child was not to be found to be eaten. That is, the depth of what happens in a siege, where food is starved out. And that's how siege warfare works. You besiege a city, you cut off its supplies, you basically starve them out until they give themselves up. And what they find here is the king tears his clothes in mourning and grief, as he should, right? And what a disturbing thing to hear. The people realize he had sackcloth on already. The king has been grieving. The king has been mourning already. And at this point, the king gets angry, not with the one who's attacking him, but with Elisha the prophet. Somehow, he thinks this is Elisha's fault, and so he sends to kill him. He makes an oath that he will kill him that very day. Elisha knows of it before it even happens. Tells his servants to bar the door, to block the door, that this murderer is sent to take off his head, and that when the messenger comes, it's not just the messenger, it's the very king of Israel's feet that they are hearing coming for him. The authority of the king to take life. The power of the sword is with this messenger to take Elisha's life. The messenger, interestingly enough, in verse 33, which is the end of the text, right? We're put on a cliffhanger and have to wait for tomorrow. The messenger admits this trouble is from Yahweh. This thing is from the Lord. So we'll see what happens tomorrow.